Thank you for joining us for a webinar on AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, hosted by IDEA, the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, and the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of African Affairs. This webinar will provide the African diaspora and other interested parties with greater awareness of the Obama administration's support for AGOA, as well as a preview of the annual AGOA Forum happening this summer and how the diaspora can get involved. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers from the Africa Bureau. Scott Tickner is the Deputy Director of Economic Policy in the Africa Bureau at the Department of State. He was Charge d'Affaires and Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Dili, Timor-Leste, from 2011 to 2014. Prior to Dili, he served as the Political and Economic Chief in Cameroon and the Political Chief in Ghana. His other prior posts include India, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, and Spain, in addition to working as a Sri Lanka desk officer in the State Department in Washington, D.C. Emily Schaefer serves as the Senior Trade and Investment Officer and the African Growth and Opportunity Act Coordinator with the African Affairs Bureau's Office of Economic and Regional Affairs at the State Department headquarters in Washington. She previously served as the Economic and Commercial Officer and Deputy Political and Economic Section Chief at the U.S. Embassy in Muscat, Oman, and as the Economic and Commercial Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Before that, Emily served as Consular Section Chief at the U.S. Embassy in Kigali, Rwanda. With that, I'll turn it over to Emily. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks, Katie, and actually I will turn it over to Scott Tickner, our Acting Director, to open us up with some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to engage with our friends from the African diaspora and others in civil society this afternoon. Welcome to all of you who are logging in, as well as those of you who are able to come and join us in person here at the State Department. I'd also like to thank the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, IDEA, for connecting us through its platform and promoting this webinar within its networks. Our senior trade analyst, Emily Schaefer, who's been introduced, will provide you with background about the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, which was renewed last summer for another 10 years. She'll provide you with more details, but as you may know, AGOA is our most generous trade preference regime with any region in the world, providing duty-free access to the United States for over 6,000 products from Africa. Per the authorizing legislation, we are required every year to organize a meeting of the Trade Ministers and senior U.S. officials called the AGOA Forum. We're all working hard to prepare for the 15th annual AGOA Forum, which the U.S. government will host in the United States this year. We hope to be able to announce the final dates and location for the event very soon. The theme for this year's forum will be maximizing AGOA now to prepare for the post-AGOA future. This reflects Congress's main priorities as spelled out in the reauthorized AGOA legislation. The main ministerial event will allow for official engagement between Trade Minister-level delegations from the 38 African members of AGOA and their official U.S. counterparts, as well as speaker panels related to trade and economic development policy and programs. Among other topics, it may include panels focused on women in business as well as on worker rights. As you may know, AGOA legislation requires an annual review of compliance with eligibility criteria for each country currently eligible for AGOA. Eligibility is based on statutory criteria established by the U.S. Congress. It requires, among other things, a country to have established or to make continual progress toward establishing political pluralism, the rule of law, and a market-based economy, elimination of barriers to U.S. trade and investment, protection of internationally recognized worker rights, a system to combat corruption and bribery, and economic policies to reduce poverty. AGOA criteria also require the country not engage in gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. Civil society has a critical role in encouraging progress in all these areas and in providing input on political rights and governance, as well as economic and business issues. More than ever, we look to you in the diaspora community to play this role as we move into the last 9+ years of AGOA, after which we will not have the leverage AGOA benefits provide. So I want to challenge members of the diaspora today. You have a major role to play. You are change makers and you can impact policy. You know the culture of your home countries and you have the relationships there. You have relationships there. You also know how to navigate the business world of your countries. And we hope, of these countries, and we hope that you use your unique position to continue to advocate for this important democratic and economic progress. For the upcoming forum and beyond, we will continue to encourage the civil society and private sector to organize their meetings in the margins of the ministerial forum. The recommendations resulting from these meetings have propelled AGOA forward in many ways. I met with a number of African diaspora groups over the past year, and I know you and others in civil society are eager to be involved. This webinar is part of our efforts to bring more of you into the discussion. If you're interested in getting involved, please contact us so we can direct you to the appropriate organizers. Fred Oladende is the chairman of the U.S.-based AGOA Civil Society Network. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Tijan Ibar is the State Department liaison for the civil society planning aspects of the forum. You can easily find the AGOA Civil Society Network online via Google or email at AGOA CSONET, the AGOA CSONET at democracy-africa.org. Before I hand it over to my colleagues, I'd like to end by framing AGOA in the context of our broader strategy, U.S. strategy and policy towards sub-Saharan Africa, and welcome to those of you who just arrived. With this, I'll point your attention to the slide on screen, if we can get that slide, showing the 4 pillars of U.S. policy towards Africa. This may be a lot to absorb in one screen, but you can see that our strategy elevates 2 efforts that are critical to Africa's future: strengthening democratic institutions and boosting broad-based economic growth, including through trade and investment. Strong, accountable, and democratic institutions sustained by a deep commitment to the rule of law generate greater prosperity and stability. They help mitigate conflict and contribute to security. Sustainable, inclusive economic growth is a key ingredient to security, political stability, and development. We're working with our African partners, in large part through the AGOA eligibility criteria, that process, to build strong institutions, to remove constraints to trade and investment, to expand opportunities for African countries to effectively access each other's markets and global markets, to embrace sound economic governance and diversify their economies beyond a narrow reliance on natural resources. We encourage African companies to seize trade and investment opportunities in Africa so that their skills, encourage American companies to seize opportunities so that their skills, your skills, capital, and in technology will support the region's economic expansion while helping to create jobs here in America. So thank you again. Let me turn it over to Emily, who's going to walk us through a primer on AGOA. I'm sure I'll learn something new every time I go through this. Before handing it over, and I should have welcomed Connie Hamilton in the beginning. Welcome, Connie. Thank you for coming. Connie Hamilton is our Deputy Assistant United States Trade Representative for Africa. And we'll turn it over to her after Emily for some additional insights into President Obama's trade policy focus and current thinking on ways forward for AGOA. So thank you. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions.
Thanks, Scott. So this is Emily Schaefer again. I'm the Senior Trade and Investment Officer here at the State Department's African Affairs Bureau. So we're on the slide. If you look to the slide with the different presidential initiatives, just to kind of set AGOA into context, AGOA was established in 2000 under President Clinton, and it's always had broad bipartisan and bicameral support in the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress. So it continues to this day, and you can kind of see the framework for our economic development assistance to Africa. You know, the key flagship initiatives under President Bush there, MCC, a huge infrastructure program that still continues today, PEPFAR, huge program addressing HIV and AIDS, and the Malaria Initiative, which has basically eliminated malaria on the island of Zanzibar and many other places in Africa. And so now, under President Obama, some more flagship initiatives there. And in fact, I had sent a slightly updated version that I had added PAC-DBIA, the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa, but I'll send the most recent version of this slide afterwards. But so you can see here that under President Obama, Feed the Future is a huge initiative looking at food security and looking at value chains, maize, rice, beans, and very much interlaps with trade because it's looking at regional value chains. And of course, I have someone in the room from USAID, so if there are questions about our assistance during the Q&A time, Viju may be better poised to respond. So then Power Africa, again, significant initiative trying to address the sort of one of the major costs, one of the major gaps in infrastructure. You know, it's all very well, as we'll see later, to have zero tariffs and to have free access to the U.S. market. But if the power isn't there to power the factories, that's a huge supply-side constraint. So we're looking at that. Trade Africa is another initiative reflecting President Obama and this administration's realization that it's not just about immediately getting to the U.S. market. The U.S. market is a very complex and difficult market for small producers in Africa to reach. So Trade Africa also focuses on regional trade, helping African countries better trade with their neighbors and invest in regional corridors and value chains as a first step towards better sort of promoting international exports. YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative, brings Mandela Washington Fellows here every summer, and then there's also fellows within Africa that have their own training centers and programs, sort of developing a cadre of young African leaders who will be the next generation of leadership in Africa, just in trying to give them a better understanding of the U.S. system and develop strong relationships with them. And then the Global Entrepreneurship Summit arose from President Obama's 2009 speech in Cairo to the Muslim world, but not just now focused on the Muslim world, but on entrepreneurs worldwide. So that final Global Entrepreneurship Summit will happen this June in Silicon Valley at Stanford University. And then Select USA is sort of focused on investing in America. The first time we've had a domestic investment promotion agency under President Obama. Okay, so now so I've put that sort of in context, some background on AGOA there. I'm not going to sort of go into every detail, just being conscious of time, and you'll have the slides so you can look through them more closely. Just again, reiterating a very generous trade preference program, and this is a one-way, this is a unilateral trade preference program. So it's not a two-way reciprocal free trade agreement. It's something that we offer unilaterally without getting access to the African country, beneficiary country markets in return. And through the criteria, the eligibility criteria, which Scott mentioned earlier, we try to reinforce reforms, policy reforms. So I mentioned also Trade Africa. We do have USAID supports trade hubs that are associated with AGOA in East, West, and Southern Africa. So the trade hubs in Nairobi, Pretoria, and Accra, with satellite offices in other countries, support AGOA through capacity building, focusing on best prospect, sort of high value chains in each region. And then, of course, the AGOA Forum is mandated in the AGOA legislation. That's our annual ministerial level policy dialogue, which also incorporates civil society and private sector, and we'll see more about that. Okay, so as we mentioned, AGOA covers more than 6,000 products, 6,400 products. They just have to have at least 35% African value added. That's the rules of origin. So very generous. This is on top of GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, which is open to all poor countries. So AGOA is unique in that it goes beyond GSP. It offers sub-Saharan African countries a special privilege of additional access to our market for value-added processed manufactured goods, namely textiles, which are traditionally very highly protected, and margins can go up to 30% in some cases. So that's a very special and unique privilege for Africa. In addition, what's unique about AGOA is the third country fabric rule. So it's a sort of exception to the rules of origin, which allows least developed countries that are beneficiaries of AGOA to use fabric and other inputs to apparel from other third countries. They don't have to use their own inputs in that 35% value added. Okay, so Scott mentioned that this is a one-way preference, so we do have criteria. We do have our eligibility criteria, and they're listed here. I won't, read each one, but I would just say probably the most frequent that we see, that we deal with in our engagement with the beneficiary countries is probably rule of law, political pluralism, increasingly worker rights, and I would just say, and we'll get more into this, Congress has a decreasing tolerance for C, the barriers to U.S. trade and investment. As Africa becomes more of an attractive market to U.S. business, as we're seeing more African countries entering into two-way reciprocal agreements with European partners, we're becoming a bit less tolerant of barriers to U.S. trade and investment. These are the criteria. Okay. Here's a little snapshot, AGOA in 2015. So while petroleum has been sort of the majority of exports under AGOA for the last several years, it is declining now to about 50% from as high as 90%. But that's largely just due to sort of global economic trends and the declining price of oil. We have seen under AGOA a quadrupling in non-oil exports, mainly textiles. However, that's from a very small base, and it's still a relatively very small amount. I think that it got to about $4.9 billion in 2013, and that is still under 2% of U.S. imports, and about 1% of global trade. Well, Africa's exports about 1% of global trade. Even the South Africa, which benefits the most from AGOA in terms of non-oil exports, is using very few of the available tariff lines, the thousands of tariff lines that are available under AGOA. So when you were talking about non-oil exports, which is really the goal, the purpose of AGOA is to diversify and to use textile exports and as a means of creating jobs and diversifying and going up the value chain. There have been, a handful of success stories. You see, South Africa especially has benefited because they had a very developed manufacturing sector. The auto industry, especially in South Africa, has grown, exponentially because of AGOA. Shipping BMWs and other vehicles duty-free to the U.S. market under AGOA has been a huge boon to South Africa. And then in terms of textiles, we have seen good success in Kenya, Lesotho, Mauritius, Madagascar, and Swaziland, though unfortunately, Swaziland was suspended for violating our criteria last year. Years of consistent failure to respect worker rights, to allow unions to register freely, to meet freely, and to allow trade union leaders to speak and express themselves freely. So there has been some modest success, though not as much as we would have wanted to see in terms of boosting non-oil exports under AGOA. So here's where I'd probably hand over to our colleague Connie Hamilton, who's the Deputy U.S. Assistant Trade Representative for Africa, to talk about this new reauthorization of AGOA and how Congress sort of addressed some of those issues.
Thank you, Emily. Let me just say that although we give AGOA to governments, it is the private sector and the business that private sector creates that actually drives AGOA success stories. So the role of the diaspora in advancing our trade and investment relationships with African countries is really critical to the success of AGOA. There are a number of new changes that came with the renewal of AGOA, and I recommend that if you're not familiar with it, that you do take time to read online the Trade Preferences Extension Act of 2015. It's not very long, and it can tell you specifically what new changes Congress introduced in AGOA. I'm going to talk about two of those elements now, the country strategic planning for AGOA and the new rules for country eligibility under AGOA. At USTR, we remain very concerned about the underuse of AGOA and whether countries are doing all they can to take advantage of this important program. And as Scott mentioned, although it's been renewed for 10 years, in June 29 we will be down to 9 years. So time is going by really, really quickly. Congress addressed some of these concerns about AGOA utilization by inserting in TPA strong recommendations that countries and regional organizations develop biannual AGOA strategic plans so they can more effectively and strategically take advantage of AGOA. It is the intention of Congress that these plans identify obstacles that inhibit the use of AGOA and identify solutions. Congress has requested that these plans be published and made available to the public. We think at USTR that this is a great opportunity for African governments to consult with their many AGOA stakeholders, the private sector, labor, civil society, to identify resources and technical assistance they can provide to address constraints on trade. AGOA also has a new petition process, and this means that anyone at any time can file a petition with the United States regarding a country's compliance with the AGOA eligibility criteria. A Federal Register notice describing the new petition process was published on March 18, 2016, and again, I recommend that you go online and find that and look at what the new rules are. CPA also institutionalizes the out-of-cycle review process, and an out-of-cycle review is not new to AGOA. We've done quite a few of these over the past few years, but TPEA gives the President the ability to initiate an out-of-cycle review at any time and the flexibility, if warranted, to partially remove a country's AGOA benefits instead of terminating a country completely from the program. On the one hand, while this means that there are new options other than termination of a country under AGOA for those with problems with the eligibility criteria, it also means that we can take action to address concerns that may have stayed under the radar because we did not want to take a country out of the program altogether. So while the AGOA review process has always been rigorous, my sense is that these changes to the program could invite greater scrutiny of countries' eligibility from Congress and the public in the future. Where do we go beyond AGOA? Both Africa and the global economy have changed dramatically since AGOA was first enacted 15 years ago. While we are delighted by the 10-year extension of AGOA, we are also quite convinced that we should be working with you now in partnership to build what comes next, beyond the status quo and beyond AGOA. U.S. businesses and investors increasingly look to Africa for trade, investment, and growth opportunities, but they struggle to navigate a daunting set of policy challenges: high tariffs, small markets, weak infrastructure, lack of transparency, onerous policies and regulations, and the tariff disadvantages that will arise out of the EPAs. AGOA beneficiary countries are concerned about what happens after 2025 when AGOA expires. They are concerned about the mega-regional free trade agreements the United States has been negotiating, TPP with Asia and TTIP with Europe, and the impact that these agreements could have on African competitiveness in the U.S. market. So where do we go from here? As part of TPEA, Congress has asked the administration to identify African countries that have been interested in FTA with the United States and to identify a strategy going forward. At Ambassador Froman's direction, we're taking this opportunity to do an extensive analysis on the question of how we deepen the U.S.-Africa trade and investment relationship. USTR is preparing a report that will go to Congress that will lay out a set of options for the next administration to consider in advancing the U.S.-African trade and investment agenda. We are approaching this question with an open mind and a strong interest in finding creative solutions. But whatever strategies are pursued in the future by a new Congress and a new administration, they will only be successful if part of a shared vision with our African partners. So we look forward to working with African countries, with all the stakeholders, with civil society, the diaspora, to build on the successes of AGOA, to establish even deeper and more sustainable trade and investment partnerships with African governments in the future.
Thank you, Connie. And I would just note on TPP that we've had a lot of questions from sort of African diplomats about how this will affect AGOA. And one of Connie's colleagues at the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, did assure us that AGOA was considered when TPP was being negotiated. And as such, there are very lengthy phase-in periods for textiles, cognizant of the competition posed by Vietnam, which is already the United States' second largest supplier of textiles, even paying duties. So there's a long phase-in period for Vietnam to supply the U.S. with textiles, and as well the Vietnam would not benefit from the third country fabric provision that African countries enjoy under AGOA. So there were some protections put in, but at the same time he was very clear it is time for African countries to really consider what happens next, because there is a phase-in, but the reality is that tariffs are becoming less important and that this preference is eroding in value. The trend globally is for tariffs to sort of become less and less important. So we've got to think of a competitive advantage beyond tariffs. Okay, so the AGOA Forum. So it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's mandated in the legislation that we should meet every year and talk about progress on AGOA, trade policy. We often address eligibility issues too, the issues that we mentioned earlier on worker rights, human rights, political pluralism, etc. Last year it was in Africa, in Gabon, and now it's our turn to host here in the United States this summer, this year. And as I mentioned, we usually enjoy side events by the private sector, AWEP, the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program, and civil society, and yourselves. So we look forward to talking more about that. So, I'll let you look at this later, but these are just some of the host countries and themes in the past. And then we're hosting this year. As Scott mentioned, I put in this newer version, but it, I guess, didn't make it. The theme this year is maximizing AGOA now, to prepare for the post-AGOA future. And so that reflects Congress's priority which they wrote explicitly into the legislation, that they recommend that the countries develop AGOA strategies to maximize utilization for the rest of the time that we have, but we do need to be seriously preparing for a future beyond AGOA. So that'll be sort of the focus of our discussions at the policy level. And then, we typically have a variety of side events. There may be, as Scott mentioned, high-level roundtables focused on worker rights, how to incorporate women, elevate women in terms of promoting trade and exports, various other panels on all the various work that we're doing around trade capacity building, infrastructure, power, all of that kind of thing is usually the kinds of things that get discussed. Okay, so how to get involved? we hope that we thank you. We see that there's about 90 people online, and there's people in the room. We thank you for your interest, and we hope that you will get involved. As we mentioned, the AGOA Civil Society Network is here. We've given you their email address. It's in the chat box. You can get in touch with us. We need support in proponents in promoting the eligibility criteria. More and more, this issue of third terms and elections is coming up in Africa. So we know, as Scott mentioned, that you're very well positioned to help us promote these sort of American AGOA values that we mentioned earlier, as well as just practically kind of serving as middlemen. And some of you here are in that role of helping African producers reach this difficult and complex market. Okay. So I think, Katie, we can open up for questions now.
Excellent. We have quite a few that have been submitted through our chat box, so I think we'll just get started with one of the first ones. It comes from an AWEP Secretary General of Nigeria, and he would like to know how we can identify wholesalers in the U.S. who will buy from a specific cooperative.
Okay, how we can identify wholesalers who will buy off our cooperative. Okay. Well, okay, I might bring in USAID because I talked about the trade hubs. Yeah, and we see that, AGOA is pretty much a black box for some of us. We hear that complaint a lot from especially small African producers that they don't have awareness about AGOA, they don't know what it is. And, and we're sorry to hear that after, the 15 years of this law being in place, and we've tried to do outreach through our embassies and through the AGOA Forum every year. But there are a lot of misconceptions. AGOA in itself is not a program or a capacity building program to help people export to the United States. AGOA itself is just a law. It's just, as it says, an opportunity to access the U.S. market. So our trade hubs that are run by USAID and contractors in the field are the ones on the ground who have that expertise in terms of matchmaking, looking at value chains. They do things like taking textile producers from Africa to the biggest trade shows, the Magic Show in Las Vegas, helping to set up a Source Africa Pavilion and set up matchmaking with U.S. buyers. So that kind of thing is run out of our trade hubs in East, Southern, and West Africa. I'm not sure what this cooperative is selling, but I would encourage them to through our U.S. Embassy in Abuja or Lagos. They can connect you with USAID, the mission there, and the mission there does some trade work, but also regionally they can connect you with the regional trade hub. Based on whatever you're selling. I know in West Africa they do a lot of work in shea butter, cashews, textiles. So that's what I would say. I don't have anything to add.
Emily put everything together, and we have 3 trade hubs, one in Nairobi, one in Accra, and one in Pretoria. Those trade hubs are accessible to all the investors, the prospective business people. So they should contact this trade hub, run through the contractors, and they should be able to help.
Okay.
Emily, may I just add a quick note? It's Tony Carroll, who's done a lot of work in Nigeria. The new Minister of Trade was here recently. It's certainly an ambition of the new Buhari government to promote the export of non-traditional products, including manufactured items, and to take fuller advantage of AGOA. There's historically been a Nigerian Export Promotion Agency, NEPA, that has offices in Lagos and in Abuja, as maybe elsewhere. And I think they're trying to refine their toolkit to be more proactive in being able to identify, support, and promote manufacturers in Nigeria. So I do think that there is a will. Whether that will is backed up with adequate resources, perhaps only time will tell. But I think I've never heard such an embrace as I have in the most recent visit by the Trade Minister to suggest that this is a program that's gone underutilized in terms of supporting Nigerian exporters.
Thanks, Tony. And you raise a very good point that our trade hubs are there, but they are supported with limited taxpayer funds, and so they do need to sort of focus on the most high value, high potential value chains, and they can't necessarily help everyone, especially smaller producers. So we definitely look to the national governments, the host governments, to make the most of AGOA, and while USAID would assist, countries who have political will in developing their AGOA utilization strategies, as we mentioned earlier, we do expect the governments to do the work, to do the bulk of the work on their own, to want to use AGOA and to take the initiative to take advantage of it. Yeah. So shall we go on to the next question?
Great. I think there's a question about the AGOA Forum, when it's happening and if it's open to the public and how people can get involved.
Good question, yeah. We hope to announce the dates shortly. It will be here in the United States, probably here in the East Coast, probably Washington or New York. Again, very shortly, we do hope to announce a date. It'll probably be in August or September. In terms of how to get involved, we work very closely with the AGOA Civil Society Network, and they usually organize a side event the day before the main ministerial, and then based on space considerations and sort of there are typically a few places for civil society to participate in the main ministerial day events. So I don't know if Fred Oladinde is here from the Civil Society Network.
Thank you very much, Emily. And once the date and the venue for the forum is announced, we would have an outreach to all interested stakeholders, particularly civil society stakeholders, on organizing the civil society session. And so we would have the agenda, the programming, and also ask for input from all of the interested parties. So you could always reach us on the AGOA Civil Society Network website, which you can Google, or you could go on our website, and the information on dates and venue will be announced as soon as we get it from Scott Tigno and Emily and from Connie Hamilton. But we're looking forward to full participation. This is going to be a very important forum because it will be the first in the United States since we had a 10 years extension. And so we're expecting full participation so that we can work collectively on trying to come up with recommendations among ourselves as important stakeholders on how we can optimize the benefits of AGOA and work with national government. I think the key point here is we have a 10 years extension, and we need to work with eligible countries on the supply side to take full advantages of AGOA, since we know there's not going to be, hopefully, there may not be another extension on AGOA. Thank you.
Can I add to that? Thank you, Fred. To answer your question kind of directly, it's not the forum itself is not open. The ministerial part of it is not open to the public. But like I mentioned in my remarks, we look forward to, as has been the case in the past, having a select representation from civil society and also from the private sector. The way we organize it, we have separate sort of we call side events, separate programs for civil society and for the private sector, with the corporate sector. And that part, it's a lot to be organized. But those groups and the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program participates as well. I expect that there'll be some members of AWEP as well, and participating in those, in their separate, related but sort of side events, not the main ministerial I think is open, but we'll refer you to the organizers of those events, like the Civil Society Network on the civil society part, and then the private sector and AWEP. We haven't identified exactly how those will be organized yet, but there'll be points of contact for you to reach out to them as well. But again, the ministerial itself is a closed event with some select representation.
So, Katie, we can move to the next question.
Great. Thank you. So there have been a couple of questions about AGOA might be helpful to disadvantaged entrepreneurs, such as young entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs in South Africa, women entrepreneurs. Can you speak to how AGOA might be especially helpful for them?
Sure, and I can start, and then anyone can jump in. Well, again, while AGOA isn't in itself a capacity building program, we do have some programs that have come up around AGOA. I mentioned the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program, AWEP, a very successful program started by the State Department that has now chapters in most African countries. If you just go to awepnetwork.org, you can see there are chapters in most African countries. So these women, as I mentioned, they come to the AGOA Forum every year. They get a broad hearing from high-level U.S. government ministers and African ministers. And the goal of the AWEP network is to supply African women entrepreneurs and exporters with networking, help with access to finance, and training, help with sort of business plans and such. And so, for example, within AWEP, we've had a good success with a sort of a mentoring program, the Missing Middle of Africa initiative, matching up export-ready women with mentors in multinationals like Marriott and Walmart, Massmart in South Africa, to groom them, to prepare them to supply, to become suppliers. And under AWEP, we also have centers now in partnership with an NGO called We Create, where in Lusaka and Nairobi, and hopefully soon a third one in West Africa, probably in Mali, we have a whole slew of training programs, business plan competitions, seed money available through competition, and mentorship, workspace. So they've just opened in the last year, and they've already trained and seeded several thousand women through those AWEP We Create centers. For young entrepreneurs, again, AGOA isn't a program. It's just a law that provides access to the U.S. market. So it's really up to, the beneficiaries to make the most of it. But we do have, as I mentioned, YALI, the Young African Leadership Initiative, which isn't directly tied to AGOA, but we do have entrepreneurship tracks in that program where we bring young YALI fellows here to the U.S. They get tours, they get matched up with American entrepreneurs. They get to see how it's done here. And we're trying to incorporate them into the AGOA Forum as well. Some of them came and spoke last summer, and we hope some of them will be at the AGOA Forum this time as well. And then for disadvantaged exporters, like in South Africa, that's a good question. And I think it was public. We had a recent out-of-cycle review of South Africa under AGOA, and one of the benchmarks in our issue with South Africa as to their barriers to U.S. trade and investment was that our U.S. poultry industry offered to develop historically disadvantaged Black South African poultry stakeholders, so helping to create basically a distribution and supply network in South Africa for the small Black farmers that were historically, not participating with the larger South African Poultry Association farmers. So that was a direct result of AGOA, because this was a result of our out-of-cycle review of South African barriers to U.S. meats. But as I said, I see a lot of questions about programs and support for Africans to take advantage of AGOA, and again, there's not sort of an equivalent, as somebody asked, there's not sort of an equivalent AGOA platform here of U.S. buyers and middlemen, unfortunately, to help African producers get here. That's a challenge. But our USAID hubs, I've just come from visiting them. They do a lot of work in Africa, and not just the hubs in those 3 cities. There are satellite offices in West Africa. About 7 countries have AGOA resource centers, which are run locally in addition to the hub, and they're doing all of this kind of thing in terms of developing the African suppliers. So, again, we can't do it all. We do look to the host government to support their own exporters, and that should be part of their AGOA utilization strategy. Anything to add at this point? Or?
I would like to make a comment. I didn't close, so I am a business owner in the textile.
I think it's close enough.
It's close enough. Okay.
All right. So speaking about matchmaking and also the work of the trade hubs in Africa, I think one thing that would be really helpful perhaps would be to put in place an online platform where the African manufacturers can easily and directly connect with buyers in the United States, like myself. Because the manufacturers in Africa think that they are in the black box. We on this side as well have the same problem. It's difficult to find a manufacturer on the ground. And it's not just any manufacturer that you need. You need one that is dependable, reliable, and who is familiar with AGOA and the process and logistics of export. So having an online platform where both sides can easily meet and then engage in discussion would be really, really, really helpful and will remove a lot of the bottlenecks that you have at this moment.
Yeah.
I wanted to add that actually in Zambia, when we had the forum in Zambia, there was the Africa Trade Development Center. It's still work in progress, and the objective of the Africa Trade Development Center, which is actually in Miami, Florida, is to help provide such a platform. And the platform would be able to bring buyers from the United States who have products. They are looking at Africa as the market and try to build that relationship. But more importantly, it would be to utilize the benefits of AGOA to encourage exports from Africa into the United States. And the platform is already in place, but there are still certain things that are that's being done to familiarize that. And the Africa Trade Development Center, the objective is to work with export promotion councils and investment promotion councils in Africa so that these agencies will be more aware of the benefits of AGOA and be able to use that platform in terms of promoting not only their products but also investment opportunities in Africa to U.S. producers and investors. And we're looking at working as closely as we can with companies like yourself and others on the U.S. side, but also more importantly with African producers who do have products, particularly micro, small, medium enterprises, who do not have the know-how of navigating the markets here in the United States. And by the way, the Africa Trade Development Center is in a free zone in Miami and has the full support of the Miami-Dade County government as interested in becoming a platform to support expanded trade under AGOA. Thank you.
That's helpful, Fred, and thanks. We really appreciate these when third parties and private parties can come up to fill the gap, because we're the U.S. government. We offer this access to our market, but we can't do it all. And so how can they find the Africa Trade Development Center? Can they Google it?
Yes,
okay.
They can. And also if they go on our website, information on the Africa Trade Development Center is there, which is www.democracy-africa.org. Right. This is a non-profit part of the foundation trying to support expanded trade under AGOA. Thank you.
Okay, I just sent that web address. Okay, I think we can move on, Katie.
Great. There have been a couple of questions specifically about Sierra Leone. Could you speak about any AGOA activity that's happening there?
Okay. Well, not in particular. Sierra Leone would be covered by the West Africa Trade Hub, and people can sort of, I think it's watradehub.org, or if you just Google West Africa Trade Hub, it pops right up. I saw somebody offering to help serve as a middleman or a platform for exporters in Sierra Leone. That's great. Katie, maybe you can help put me in touch. I'm sure our USAID folks would be happy to meet them. I think it was somebody from the World Bank. But yeah, no. This, as I said, this is just a program that's available, and if people want to, promote it and help producers take advantage of it, we welcome that.
Excellent.
In Sierra Leone, I think we don't have anything specifically on AGOA, but there's a lot of post-Ebola economic recovery support work going on and funding for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we do have someone on the call who's from Nepal and had a question about the Trade Facilitation and Enhancement Act of 2015. Don't know if you have any information on that or know who they might contact to talk about trade preferences for Nepal.
I think the act that was passed was a Trade Preferences and Extension Act. And as far as the Trade Facilitation or Trade Capacity Building Act, I think that was a draft law that hasn't been passed by Congress yet.
I think it has, but
or,
Yeah, I think
okay.
we have to focus on sub-Saharan Africa, I think, in this.
Yeah. So we wouldn't be the right people to speak to that.
It's a bit off topic, just to know if you had a contact for them or a place where they could find more information.
Congress website, yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I could Google the act itself.
Call Kathleen.
That's good.
Yeah.
Move on. So you spoke a little bit about, the future post-AGOA and the decreasing importance of tariffs as a competitive advantage. Could you speak about potential strategies for continuing this competitive trade advantage for Africa?
Well, again, that's the AGOA utilization strategies that Congress strongly recommended in the new AGOA legislation last June, that each beneficiary country should develop an AGOA utilization strategy for how are they going to make the most of AGOA, and we're encouraging them now in this strategy to look at things like power, roads, trade facilitation. How long does it take to get a container from the main port to your city where your manufacturers are? They should be doing things like trade facilitation, decreasing times for processing at the borders, things like electronic payments at the borders, advanced rulings at the borders, all part of the trade facilitation agreement under the WTO that most African countries agreed to but haven't yet ratified. So that these AGOA utilization strategies shouldn't just be focused on, okay, we're just going to really develop our cashew sector, but the underlying supply side constraints also. How are we going to become more competitive? Our electricity tariffs are so high that even with the zero duty under AGOA, we still can't compete. So they're supposed to go into those issues, and many countries have already been working on these strategies. We've helped by circulating some best practices. For example, these strategies should be inclusive. They should be talking to the women exporters. They should be talking to the financiers, the export financing banks, because access to finance is an issue we hear again and again, and taking into account all these things like electricity, roads, time and cost to trade. And I know USAID has been helping a number of countries that have demonstrated political will to complete their strategies, and we're going to be focusing on those this summer at the AGOA Forum and looking at, sort of best practices and lessons learned. But so those are some of the ways to address that. Sorry, I don't know if I answered the whole question. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just add.
Yeah, is there any?
As Connie Hamilton, we're looking at the sort of the possibly the options for sort of the post-AGOA trade relationships with Africa as well. Whether it's free trade agreements or other kinds of regimes that go beyond the kinds of things that Emily mentioned in terms of things that individual countries in Africa can do to make themselves and their companies more competitive, and companies can do. So it's sort of that dual track of looking at the utilization issue as well as beginning to talk about what happens after AGOA in terms of our trade regimes with Africa.
Excellent, thank you guys. Sure. There was a question about visas, specifically trader, I think it says treaty trader investor visas, and how limited they are, and if there's anything happening to make them a little bit more open to African traders and investors so that they can take advantage of the AGOA Act more easily.
Well, okay, I'm not a consular visa expert, but I think the EB5 investor treated trader visa is aimed at increasing investment in America. So if you pledge to invest $1 million or $500,000 in a disadvantaged area in the United States, then you can qualify for this residence visa. So that's not really directly related to AGOA because we're trying to promote investment in African exports, not so much in the U.S. So I think I'll just leave it at that because I'm not a visa expert.
No problem. Thank you, Emily. Let's see.
We welcome questions from this room as well. If you have, I know we've had a few, or at least one already, but if you have questions, I think we have. We're the benefit of a lot of AGOA knowledge in this room, not just those of us who've spoken, but others who've been working with AGOA for a long time.
Oh, sorry. I see the person who was asking the question about visas. E1 and E2 are visas to let traders and investors visit America to promote their products. Okay, that's different. Again, I can't really get into visa issues. We really don't have a lot of leeway. Nobody has any leeway really to influence visas except the adjudicator, the consular officer, who has to make that determination. I would say embassies, our economic and commercial officers at our embassies are usually engaging with the local business community, and if you're active in the local business community and maybe in the AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce, and well known to the embassy, that sometimes they do have referral programs, and if you're well known to them, it may be easier for them to know enough about you to make a decision about a visa, but I can't speak to those specific visa categories.
No question. The trade hub in Southern Africa was closed. I saw online.
It's been the expiration of the trade hub will now be succeeded by trade and investment hub. So you're in between iterations of that program.
The current hub is over. The contract is over. And the new hub, the new contract will be, I think it's signed last week.
Yeah, it was signed last week.
Yeah. So it will be in operation.
The operating consultancies, DAI, will be.
Yeah.
In Pretoria?
It's based in Pretoria.
Okay.
Signed last week, and it will be operational soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they will be handling the AGOA function for.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the chief of party is Vanessa Adams, who used to be the chief of party for the West Africa Trade Hub.
Okay.
So she knows an awful lot about these sectors.
Okay.
Awful lot.
That's great.
So next question.
I'm not sure I see a lot from this side. Do you have any questions with your audience over there?
When countries have to have their AGOA plans completed for the next 10 years? Is that what's going to be covered totally at the conference coming this summer?
They should actually be working on them now, so that on June 29th, when we send our first report to Congress on AGOA implementation, we should be able to report on those countries who have actually completed their plans, what they say. And USTR will also put some up on our website, since the Congress has asked us to make sure that they get published. But they are biennial plans, which means that they're a living document. So just because you finish the first one doesn't mean that you stop. So in 2 years, we'll be looking for an update for those plans. So this is going to be going on for a while.
All right,
Okay,
great. Well,
I saw a question about the We Create Center in Mali. We hope to get it up and running by the end of the year, and it would initially first start just, with Malian women, but, if these centers can become sustainable with public-private partnerships, we would love for them to become regional and be replicated and serve the region, but it really is a funding issue and a sustainability issue.
And the We Create Centers is a partnership that we have with Caterpillar Foundation, and it's essentially we work with Startup Cup as our NGO partner, and it's a very finite, small amount of money to get these centers up and running. They're physical centers, but for them to be sustainable, they need to look towards models that provide them some financial sustainability. And as Emily mentioned, these are very new. The one in Zambia and Kenya opened in the last year, and seem to be doing well. But it's all a bit of an experiment. There are other We Create centers in the world, though. Pakistan, Cambodia, I think in particular, the ones that I can think of. And so it's a model that has worked elsewhere.
Scott, can I say something? It's Tony Carroll again. I think for those of you who are looking to export from Africa, and one of the constraints I think that we found in the 15 years of AGOA has been supply response. And one of the constraints in supply response has been the availability of power. I think we're starting to see impressive inroads in the development of not only just power generation, but the extension of distribution and transmission facilities. I think Power Africa has been certainly an accelerant in that process. Those companies that are looking for opportunities to increase their availability of power possibly should follow some of the Power Africa leads, but also look as to what's being done elsewhere, because I think a country like Ethiopia, which in the last 10 years has only recently come on to be a powerhouse in the production of electricity, has also seen a concomitant growth in exports. So I think power is a crucial ingredient, has been a supply constraint, and I think that the power solution will often be a helpful enhancement to export competitiveness.
I see a question here about it's often very expensive for civil society to participate in the AGOA Forum because of lack of financial means to cover the cost of transport and staying in the U.S., which means that only government officials can regularly attend the forum. And we do, in fact, encourage our official counterparts when we send out the invitations to include members of civil society, AWEP women, private sector in their delegations. So, depending on the size of the delegation, the space, we do actively encourage your African governments to bring members with them.
Can I add to that? While we don't have funding for to bring civil society into the States for this, we are looking at ways to connect African civil society and possibly others into the discussions in the civil society discussions through digital
platforms,
digital video conferences, maybe conference calls, things that can bridge the distance. And we have done that in the past, and it's been successful. Possibly engaging our embassies to help organize groups in Africa that could then plug in and contribute without having to travel. So we're looking for creative solutions to be inclusive.
Thank you, and I think that's a very important point. I think in the last 6-7 years, the AGOA Civil Society Network has appealed to the governments of eligible countries to, just as Emily has said, including their delegation, competent civil society stakeholders that would be able to come and be part of the forum in the United States or any of the host countries so that they can go back and be able to share the full information with counterparts. And our last recommendation from Libreville, Gabon, which is a civil society network recommendation and communique, also underscored the importance of creating ongoing relationship in country so that we can see more benefits from this participation in the forum. We believe, the Secretariat believes very strongly that we should not limit coordination and engagement just to the 1 year at the annual forum, but there should be continuity. So I think we will continue to work with our members on the ground and work with the Corps of Ambassadors here in Washington to try to see how they could include in their official delegation to each of the AGOA forums members of the civil society from their respective countries. And for us to be able to work year-long with each other in terms of addressing all of the supply-side constraints that we've talked about. We have 10 years extension now, and we all know now it's getting now tonight. And except we and the civil society can engage both our private sector and engage our government in terms of eligibility compliance and trying to optimize the benefits of AGOA. By 2025, our expectation is we would have double, triple performance in terms of trade between what we have done in the last 15 years. So the Secretariat is looking forward to working with you and working with all of our members on both sides so that we could definitely help energize and optimize the benefits of AGOA.
And I saw that there was a question about AGOA exports from someone in the Bronx who was asking about dried coconut and the process for getting approval to ship agricultural exports under AGOA and whether coconut products would fall under AGOA. I think so. Again, I have to look up the harmonized system of tariffs and check every single tariff line, but I do believe so because I just came from Ghana last week, and there's a really amazing company, Blue Skies, that has gotten approval now to ship processed fruits such as coconut, mango, etc., to the United States. Now, it is a lengthy process, I must be honest, to get approval from our U.S. Department of Agriculture and FDA. And unfortunately, that is lengthy, and I'm not an expert. Unfortunately, they're not here to speak to that. But our trade hubs have been very helpful to those exporters who do want to get their standards and certification up to international standards. In East Africa, our trade hub has been helping a lot of horticulture, fresh cut flowers. They've had a lot of success exporting to Europe, so they're meeting the European standards, which is easy to then meet U.S. standards, just a matter of transportation now. So there are examples. Blue Skies does have approval. I would just warn that the processes for agricultural products are lengthy, but the more processed the food, the easier, because if it's a dried fruit or a processed fruit, it will be easier to get approval than a fresh, raw food product. And our trade hubs can provide all that information. Any other questions?
Another question in the back, if you haven't had a chance to ask.
Actually, it's not a question. My name is Wanda, and I'm a senior teacher within the system. and I'm also part of AWEP in Kenya. And I just want to emphasize on the issue of partnerships, because the AGOA platform is a very powerful tool for the African women. However, we need to form partnerships to ensure that these women are actually empowered. Their capacities are built, and there's also information out there. Because one of the challenges that we're experiencing in Kenya, there's so many opportunities, but the information is not out there. So we need to form partnerships with governments, the civil society. We need organizations on the ground at the grassroots level to ensure that the information is out there. And once the information is out there, I'm glad that there are all these initiatives and partnerships to actually capacity build these women on the ground on financial literacy. How do they roll up their strategies? How do they export? And all these nitty-gritties that need to be, they need to know. So we need to form partnerships with these organizations. And of course, there's also the access to finance on the ground, the women on the ground. There are many of institutions that are there, especially from the Kenyan government, where the Kenyan government has set aside 30% procurement of all its tenders for youth, women, and people living with disabilities. There's also access to capital when you have small businesses for women, and the government is offering that. So these are the kind of opportunities that we can leverage on, because this is a very powerful tool. But we form the right partnerships, I'm sure we will achieve what we want to achieve. Yes.
Thank you. You want to comment?
I was just wondering if maybe Tony can.
I'll try.
Would you have any advice for any member of the diaspora here, the African diaspora, who is considering going back to Africa and setting up a manufacturing facility there, let's say in textile, with the goal of exporting and, taking advantage of AGOA?
Well, I'll offer my observations based on a lot of experience. There's always a transitional, it's not as easy as it seems. There's always been more resistance to the long-time, diaspora person coming back. But I think there's, as you've seen in Ethiopia, a real accelerant to the return of the diaspora to take advantage of export opportunities. So that's a good example. Certain countries have been more ambitious about setting up special economic zones. This has been around a long time. I first cut my teeth in this in free trade zones back in the 80s. I think that there's been perhaps more of over time, an adaptation to these zones to be more functional, and I think certain countries are becoming much more flexible, not only even limiting them geographically, but allowing them to go wherever you want to locate. So there's been more of an effort to try to create incentives, provide more structured and available infrastructure, to work with you on training grants, to follow the lead that was established in places like Costa Rica, in countries like Malaysia, and others that have used incentive structures to create and launch export businesses. So I think that there's been a learning curve, and I think, you can point to the example of not only Ethiopia, but also in Kenya, where diaspora-led investors have come back and established businesses.
I would put in a plug also for, we'll get to you in a second, taking advantage of the resources that our embassies have, and we have embassies in almost every country in Africa, but we have representation in every country in Africa. A few embassies cover two countries, but these are embassies are well plugged into the economic and the business scenes in these countries, and can be great resources. Often have specialized commercial staff that can help you understand the local environment and possibly navigate some of the problems you might encounter. One of the main things they always advise people coming in to look at businesses, whether diaspora or otherwise, is to work with a local partner, and not to just do it yourself. I think there may be a bit more of a tendency in the diaspora community to say, I know this country, I'm from here and I know the people, but there's a lot of value to having local business partners or legal advice or people who are working in those environments who can help you steer.
If I can just add one more thing, and I'd like to put in a plug for intra-regional trade, because I think it's very difficult. We're talking about AGOA, and we certainly are trying to encourage exports to the United States. This is a tough market. The United States may be one of the toughest markets to get into and to be successful in. But if you can hone your brand and your product in the region and develop something that you've tested and made sure that it's tried and true, and then try to get it into the United States, I think you almost have a better chance of succeeding, because there's a reason why we get so few products in under AGOA, and not all of it has to do with the constraints. A lot of it has to do with whether or not you can actually supply the quantity, the quality, the type of products that Americans are looking for. So if you're interested in going into business and you're local, or you want to go back home to your home country, I would say try to do something locally and in the region first. Right. It's a good way to get started before you come to the United States, because the possibility of being successful is better if you've tested your product someplace else.
And especially in East Africa, the consumer markets is booming. I mean, really. We had another question from the room.
Sure. And we have still have the same discussion in the past 10 years, and 9 years goes very fast. So I have a small comment to echo what we said about partnership, because I've been, since I left Congress, in two and a half years now, I've been having programs on the ground in Cameroon, in Nigeria, training women, young entrepreneurs, recruiting young entrepreneurs throughout Africa, and help them develop their ideas and turn them into bankable projects. Some of them have small manufacturing. Of course, it's good to encourage intra-Africa trade relations, and they may extend the market from Cameroon to Nigeria and the West, but some of them want to export to the U.S. The easiest market for them is Europe, because the standard is not the same. But talking to AGOA in Cameroon, for example, I found that exporting to the U.S. for them is almost like a reference. Of course, the market is very huge, $14 trillion. Who doesn't want to come here? So the question I would like to ask you is, for people like us, the diaspora, who understand the system here, who have operational before, what else can we do? Because all the things I'm doing it on my own. Of course, the embassy is very supportive. This is some program with the department through video conference, but it's not enough. They literally need to be accompanied from the idea, education, training, access to market, to credit, towards getting the approval for the standard. But I think we need to have a stronger partnership between the American companies, the African producers, and probably your agencies. That's my first question. The second question is, concretely, I always like to leave a meeting with one idea. You call a diaspora meeting. What do you want us to leave this meeting with? What do you think, in your view, you have a whole opinion, we can help make AGOA more successful than it already is, especially for SMEs?
Yeah, good questions, and I like concrete too. So I would say when you go to this website, agoa.info/toolkit, which we'll send the presentation, under the toolkit, you can see the national AGOA strategies that have been developed to date. And some of them are old, but because they're being updated now, and so the new ones aren't on there yet. But we really would want to make sure that the governments are being inclusive when they're doing their new AGOA strategies. So if you have any connections with an AWEP chapter or another women's group or a Chamber of Commerce or a Rotary Club or an AmCham in your home country, is to sort of ask them, what's the status of the AGOA strategy? Have you been part of the stakeholder consultations? And if not, why not? Let's go ask the government what the status of our national AGOA strategy is. And in the best practices, in the guidance we've given about the AGOA strategies, we've been very clear. Don't obsess about AGOA and only the U.S. market. It's broader than just an AGOA strategy. It's a national competitive strategy. It should be, even if it's Europe or regional trade or neighboring countries, it doesn't have to only just be about exporting to the United States, but how are you addressing the underlying barriers, the supply side constraints? So that's a concrete thing. Yeah, and then in terms of a concrete thing, next step I would say is joining up with the civil society network so that you can be part of the activities at the AGOA Forum, and constantly throughout the year. Fred's group just had meetings last week or so at the AGOA midterm review on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings, and is constantly advocating. And we do more and more with all of these. I think every country in Africa is having an election this year or last year. So our bureau, our boss, the assistant secretary, and our bosses are constantly, most of their time is focused on elections, political pluralism, human rights, and so we do really appreciate and need support from civil society to, promote our criteria, these do op-eds, I know Fred has done things like that, kind of support our efforts.
Yeah, I think, we've mentioned a number of other resources. Hopefully there are, some useful ideas. The trade hubs, of course, you mentioned those resources. You mentioned Trade Africa, which is really working with governments to try to increase trade competitiveness. I think Fred mentioned the African Trade Development Center, which I wasn't aware of. There may be other similar kinds of online platforms or groups that are trying to bridge the Africa-U.S. markets. We mentioned AWEP. There's something called the Clinton Global Initiative, which AWEP is part of, which is matching small and medium enterprises in Africa with potential buyers in the United States, with mentorship as well. So we've been hitting at different angles. I think there's a lot of scope for other ideas from civil society, from the private sector, from governments, and maybe through these strategies that are being developed or otherwise to think about how to make this work better. I think that maybe that's sort of the major takeaway for me, for the diaspora community, is that you have, as I said in my opening remarks, and you have a unique perspective. I think your country in Africa well, but the United States well as well, and I think you can be a bridge maybe better than others can, in terms of what might work and what may not work better than many. And I think that we just encourage more of the diaspora to get involved, and whether it's through the civil society network or in other ways. So that I think is my main sort of message. Is as I mentioned, I've traveled quite a bit in the last year, met a number of diaspora groups, and I think as this event kind of reinforces, there's a lot of interest out there. I think just not maybe a good sense of how to plug in or what the possibilities are.
And if I may, I really think that's a very good question. And from your participation on this side, we've seen the diaspora play a major role in trying to steer U.S. government policy to support AGOA. We just got a 10 years renewal that most people didn't think was possible, but it was all due to the support of everybody on this table, particularly the diaspora, trying to make sure that we push our congressional members to support the bill. With a 10 years renewal, I think our focus, the diaspora focus, should be in Africa, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in Zambia, in Kenya, trying to make sure that there is also an understanding of what those governments' responsibilities are if we expect to fully optimize the benefits of AGOA, because the constraint now is also going to be on the African side to supply all of those products using AGOA benefits to get into Africa. The strategy, the plan, the Export Promotion Council, the export investment platforms, because in the final analysis, the responsibility of getting those products from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Cameroon, ensuring that it's competitive for those who are export ready for the U.S. market. And we've agreed not everyone should look at the U.S. market. We should also look at regional markets. But it's a responsibility on the African side now, And I think we should be a major force in trying to help put that in place so we can see more products coming here and we can see more intra-Africa trade. So you're an attorney, you're a lawyer, and you deal with trade issues. So we should work more on the African side now to try to see how we can realign all of these eligibility criteria, have early warning systems that would avoid countries being thrown out of the eligibility because of the out-of-cycle requirements now. So
yeah, absolutely. From my personal experience, coming from Washington, when I go back, the expectation is really high. They expect me to tell them where to export the product, where to have finance, even at the quantity level. And I'm just me. The former professional cash is coming to AGOA. It's only me. So that's one thing. And the other thing, I always encourage women who want to export to the U.S. because one important fact, there's a lot of discussion now about EPAs and possibly create an agreement in the African countries. Before we get that, we need to have a strong positive support that AGOA and SMEs because to avoid the backlash. Because people may think, okay, African country has EPAs and as soon as we die, we want to produce because what you know what's happening with our SPAs. If you don't increase our outreach on AGOA, if you don't make sure that we have more success stories on AGOA, it's going to be hard for us to advocate for it or any type of free trade relation, whatever. That's really
And there's a question there. I would just pass on to you, but I just know that's a good point, and I just want to add that we, on our side, on the U.S., have done some public hearings. We accepted public comment and testimony on the future beyond AGOA, and we are very much waiting to hear from the African governments. As Connie mentioned, what do you think? What do you want beyond AGOA? In terms of, we need to think creatively in terms of FTAs and what happens after AGOA, because really there's only, I can see, two ways to maintain access to the U.S. market. It's either a preference like AGOA or there's a free trade agreement. There's really no other way to maintain market access, and so we don't want the investors who are in East Africa investing millions of dollars in textile factories suddenly in 2025 there's no more access to the U.S. market and there's nothing, to just be left out to dry. And we are, as I mentioned, we are getting less and less tolerance for African barriers to trade because U.S. investors don't just come. They come if they can make money and they can sell. And I just came from Nigeria and Ghana, and there's a lot of problems with protectionism. So it's difficult for a U.S. investor. They're attractive markets, but to come and establish a plant to sell more if what they're already selling is pirated and then they have all these burdensome local content requirements that don't make sense. So we have less and less tolerance for that. So we're thinking more and more about FTAs. And so if the African private sector and civil society can have similar thinking and brainstorming and through chambers of commerce or through groups about what they want in terms of an FTA or the next step.
But let me be clear. We are not the demander for FTAs. We are not going to go to a country and say, you have to do an FTA with us. The reason why we're going down this path of thinking what happens beyond AGOA is because, one, as Fred said, is the likelihood of AGOA being renewed is pretty slim, which means that what do we have left? We have the GSP program and nothing else, unless you have an FTA. And Ambassador Froman and previous USTRs have been very clear that we do want to do more with Africa because we do believe that trade is transformative. And we haven't seen that happen. AGOA's been around for 15 years, and when I travel all over the continent, and I very seldom see change. In fact, sometimes I see countries that are backsliding. Cote d'Ivoire is a good example. They're going on the upswing now, but I was there at the height, then the drop, and now they're going back up again. So one of the things that we're thinking about when we look at beyond AGOA is what is it that Africa wants to do? It's not just on us to say we're going to do FTAs or we're going to do something else. Part of this question is, what are you ready to do? So we're not going to come to a country and say, you have to do an FTA with us to continue your access to our market. We're going to say, we're going to sit back and see who comes to us and says they want to do something else, who's actually prepared to do it. If you've looked at the building blocks that are in an FTA, there are about 20 or 30 chapters in there that cover all sorts of things, from the environment to tariffs. And our country's ready to do that.
Labor standards.
Labor standards. So when we have our forum, we'll talk about some of the ideas that we've come up with about moving this relationship forward. FTA is like at the end of the road. There may be things that we can do before we get there, but what we are clear on is that 9 years are going to go by really quickly. And if countries are sitting back, waiting for AGOA to be renewed after 2025, that's a mistake. If countries aren't figuring out now how to empower their private sector, folks like you, to take advantage of this program, that's a mistake. Because Congress will look at that and say, we just gave them 10 years. What did they do with it? That's what they're saying now. That was part of the fight now on AGOA renewal. What have they done in 15 years? So part of the reason why we're sort of beating the drum on getting folks to think about this program proactively and to think about it outside of what we can do, because believe me, USAID doesn't have enough money to go into every country in sub-Saharan Africa and provide assistance. We're getting requests from the centrals who are saying, give us a trade hub, and we're saying, what are you going to do to help build a trade hub? And we get nothing back. So part of the onus is on Africa to figure out what they want to do with us. And then we're here in partnership to help that make that happen. That's really my takeaway from this meeting is there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of ideas, but we really have to figure out how to implement things and make it move forward.
Just a quick comment. I'm Jacqueline Claxton. I'm actually the program manager for the African Diaspora Marketplace, which is a public-private partnership with USAID and a number of other private sector partners. And what it really does is as its platform is like a business plan competition with technical assistance and mentorship as well. It really looks at working with African diasporas in the U.S. who are looking to establish and expand their businesses on the continent. So we're happy to continue the conversation with Fred and State and with others in the room.
That's great. And how can they find the African Diaspora Marketplace? Just Google it? Or?
You can Google it. It's diasporamarketplace.org.
Okay, thank you.
That's great.
Hey, Emily, I think this might be a good place for us to wrap up. Yeah?
We agree. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you, everyone, so much for your participation and all of the energy and great ideas. I look forward to see what comes of this. And thank you especially to Scott and Emily and Connie for all of the information you've shared with us. We'll be posting the recording of today's presentation on the IDEA website, which you can find at diasporaalliance.org. And we'll also send you all the link when the recording is available. All right, thanks again, everyone. And
thank you all for your great feedback. We'll pass on your suggestions. I see a lot of good feedback in the comments. I know the East Africa Trade Hub is starting a Facebook page for exporters, but that idea of having more online interaction, it was very good, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Melanie.